next up, this company is super cool. I'm gonna shut up really quickly after I introduce him because I know we'll all probably have questions afterwards. But Doug Drysdale, CEO of Cybin. Cybin, the ticker here is CYBN on the NEO, and I believe it's CLXPF on the OTC. Is that right, Doug?
That's right, Patrick.
All right. Well, welcome, my friend. I'll get out of your way.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks for the invitation to speak today. And thanks for everybody listening for your interest in Cybin. Look forward to sharing the story with you. Just make sure to get the screen to work here. Here we go. So at Cybin, we're working to revolutionize the treatment of mental health disorders. How are we doing that? We're doing that through harnessing the enormous potential of classical psychedelic drugs. And we're taking those classical psychedelic drugs using medicinal chemistry and drug delivery to transform them into more usable, more scalable therapeutics for mental illness, such as depression and addiction. And when I talk about the enormous potential of these molecules, we've seen in small studies the ability to remove someone's depressive symptoms or their addictive cravings for months at a time from just one or two treatments. So clearly, if we're able to repeat those results in larger, well-controlled clinical studies, then these treatments are clearly life-changing. So within our discovery platform, we have 50 novel molecules that we've created to date, and we're progressing 4 programs through clinical development. Those 4 treatments are being developed for major depressive disorder, alcohol use disorder, and other therapy-resistant psychiatric disorders. Now, clearly, this work generates a lot of IP. We've filed 10 patents to date, with more coming, and we expect that IP portfolio to continue to expand over the coming 12 to 18 months at the very least. In our preclinical work, where we're looking to modify the pharmacokinetic profile of these treatments to optimize the duration of action, we've shown clear proof of concept in our clinical models, where we've proven we can adjust that pharmacokinetic profile without altering receptor binding. And we're doing a lot of this work with world-class partners such as Catalent in the UK, who is helping us with their Zydis orally disintegrating tablet technology, and with Covance also in the UK, where we're leveraging some inhalation technology to develop CYB004. As a company, we've been listed on the NEO exchange since last November. We've completed 4 oversubscribed financing rounds. The last two filled 95% by US blue chip biotech investors. So we have a strong balance sheet. We're also MJDS eligible, and which means that we're in a position to uplist to a major US tier 1 exchange in the coming weeks or months. I don't think I need to tell anybody here that depression and addiction are a major global unmet need. More than 700 million people around the world are affected by some form of mental illness or addiction or eating disorder. And when you look at long-term studies of current standards of care, like SSRIs, meta-analyses have shown that over the long term, SSRIs are no better than placebo at treating moderate depression. So we've been for years, for decades, attempting to treat the symptoms and the signs of mental illness, but not really getting to tackle the underlying causes of depression or addiction. When we look at alcohol use disorder, alcohol use is the 3rd largest preventable cause of death globally, with 3 million people that die from alcohol use each year. And many treatments here are just ineffective or they're inconvenient. And the challenge has been in the past that we've been trying to treat chronic addiction with chronic treatments that barely work. And so you're constantly battling a patient's cravings, and it's hard to see how you get compliance and adherence to treatments in those circumstances. So the potential to use acute treatments, 1 or 2 sessions, to take away someone's cravings for long periods of time, has the ability to change not only people's lives, but potentially the trajectories of entire communities. And the evidence around these psychedelic molecules is very strong. This is a study that was published last November in the Journal of the American Medical Association, Psychiatry. And it was looking at the use of psilocybin, which is our lead program, in major depressive disorder. So the same molecule and the same indication that we're pursuing. And the results here were quite stunning. The response rate was 71%. So that means that 71% of patients saw a clinically significant reduction in their depressive symptoms at just 4 weeks. And 54% of patients were in complete remission, so no depressive symptoms at all. And as the author says here, when you compare that to traditional treatments, this is about a 4 times effect size than traditional SSRIs and traditional pharmacotherapy. So again, if we can repeat these smaller studies in larger, well-controlled clinical trials, then we have an ability to completely transform how we treat depression and how we treat addiction. And we have a very strong team with deep-rooted pharmaceutical and academic pedigrees to lead the way. This team has published over 300 peer-reviewed papers, submitted more than 85 patent applications, and managed more than 60 drug development programs, INDs, with the FDA. So clearly a strong pedigree behind the research that we're doing. The bulk of our discovery and development work is focused on developing second-generation therapeutics from these well-known classical psychedelic molecules. When we look at these well-known molecules, whether it's psilocybin, DMT, MDMA, etc., they all have flaws. Many of them are very long-acting, others are very short-acting. Several of them have very poor bioavailability, which means it's hard to get those molecules into the bloodstream or into the brain. And we're using both chemistry and drug delivery to improve that duration of action, the half-life, and to improve the bioavailability of these molecules. So in terms of chemistry, what we're trying to develop here is second-generation treatments that are more scalable. Several of the current psychedelic molecules that are in development today have very long durations of action, essentially 4 or 6 hours per treatment session, with, in some cases, dozens of hours of psychotherapy associated with them. And it's hard to see how those kinds of treatments, that duration of action, can scale in a broad way to be broadly accessible by hundreds of millions of patients around the world. So our goal is to create shorter acting psychedelic treatments that can help existing infrastructure adapt more easily. And we're doing that in kind of a backward way. So rather than taking long-acting molecules and trying to make them shorter, we're taking very short-acting molecules and extending their duration. And we're doing this through a process called deuteration. Now, I don't want to get too technical, but essentially what we're doing is switching out hydrogen atoms on these molecules for deuterium, which is heavy hydrogen. And that has the purpose of slowing the breakdown of these short-acting treatments in the body. And by selectively switching out these atoms, we can modify and optimize the duration of action. When combining that with drug delivery, and we're using 3 different approaches so far: sublingual delivery, which is a film that goes under the tongue, an orally disintegrating tablet that dissolves very rapidly in the mouth, and an inhalation platform which bypasses the GI tract and the liver. By combining drug delivery and medicinal chemistry, we're able to optimize both the onset of action and the duration of action, bringing these shorter duration treatments to market. So as I mentioned, we have 4 programs currently in development. CYB001 is our lead program. It's a sublingual film formulation of psilocybin. We're developing for major depressive disorder. Right now, we're poised to enter a phase 2 study in patients with depression, and that study will run for about 12 months. CYB003 is our first novel short-acting deuterated tryptamine that we're combining with Zydis ODT technology, rapid melt technology, and that's we're developing for alcohol use disorder. We're in late preclinical studies right now. I expect to be first in man by the end of this year or maybe early 2022. And we see great potential for this molecule beyond alcohol use disorder, potentially in treatment, potentially in tobacco use disorder and opioid use disorder as well. So some very significant markets available as this moves through the clinic. CYB004 is a different novel short-acting tryptamine that we're combining with an inhalation platform. This is a molecule that has zero oral bioavailability that we're looking to deliver through the lungs in a very rapid way. And we're looking to develop this molecule for treatment-resistant psychiatric disorders and expect to be first in man in early 2022. Now, in terms of our lead program, this is our CYB001 program that we're ready to enter phase 2 for major depressive disorder. This study is planned in 2 phases, a phase 2A and a phase 2B. The phase 2A part of this program is really designed to determine the appropriate dosing because we're avoiding the GI tract, because we're avoiding first-pass metabolism in the liver. Then we expect to need far less active ingredient. So we're comparing 4 different dosage strengths of this film, 1, 3, 5, and 7 milligrams in a sublingual film that we're comparing to a traditional capsule of psilocybin, 25 milligram oral capsule. So this study will take about 3 months to complete. And from the study, we'll not only determine the appropriate dosing for the film, but also collect some secondary endpoints around safety and efficacy. We'll then move forward with that, the selected dose into a phase 2B program in 120 patients with major depressive disorder. 80 of those will receive the active ingredient, and 40 of those will receive placebo. And this study will take about 9 months to run, with primary endpoint being a reduction in the Montgomery-Åsberg Depression Scale at 30 days, with a 4-month follow-up for those patients as well from a safety perspective. So we expect data from these studies combined to publish in around mid-2022. So lots to look forward to in the months ahead. Certainly initiating our phase 2 study for MDD with CYB001 will be a big milestone for us. Moving to an IND filing for CYB003 for alcohol use disorder in late 2021, early 2022, and similarly for an IND for CYB004. Also, in the second half of this year, we plan to kick off our first study with the kernel neuroimaging technology, where we're looking to see if we can detect neural activity changes in the brain before, during, and after psychedelic treatment as well. And as I mentioned, we are MJDS eligible for an uplist to a Tier 1 US exchange and expect that to happen in the coming weeks and months. And Patrick, with that, I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Phenomenal, thank you. And that's very exciting about the uplist. I think that for the most part, it definitely seems as though you guys are killing it right now. And so I want to jump in more specifically there. You have, and correct me if any of these numbers are incorrect, but 10 different patent filings, over 20 preclinical studies, and I saw the deck reference some novel second-generation psychedelic molecules. So this tends to be a point of debate, right? About whether we're wrapping IP around, sort of the I don't want to say generic, but whatever the natural psychedelic molecule is, or a novel molecule that you can have defensible IP around. And I wonder if there's anything you want to say about that and how you are building the moat around your business in terms of those molecules being novel and second generation. That's a term I'd not heard before, so that's interesting.
Yeah, that's a good set of questions. So clearly in drug development, IP is important. Drug development is extremely expensive, very capital intensive, takes a long time. So it would make no sense without a strong IP moat around the work that we're doing. But we don't begin with IP for IP's sake. We start with the patient. And from the very beginning of our work, both with psilocybin and with our other psychedelics, we thought about the patient and what could be most useful, most beneficial, and most scalable. And at the end of the day, we think that treatments that are shorter acting, maybe an hour in duration, are going to have a greater potential for scalability than treatments that are 4 or 6 hours. It's hard to see how clinics can find the resources, the therapists, and the space, frankly, to support 4 to 6 hour treatments on a very large scale. And it's hard to see how you get broad reimbursement for those treatments as well. So from the very outset, we focused on the patient, and we've approached that in a couple of ways that I mentioned through chemistry and drug delivery. And that process has led to a broad range of patents covering novel composition of matter molecules, methods of use, and drug delivery. And we expect to continue to file more patents over the coming 12 months.
Very cool. Thank you for that. And so when it comes to the overall strategy around what again the IP is that you're building out and what specifically differentiates you from other companies out there, how important is the work that you're doing with dose optimization and controlling the overall length and intensity of psychedelic experiences? How important is that to the overall industry and the treatment of individuals, but then certainly to your own brand, your own therapy that you guys are developing?
Yeah, well, clearly that dose optimization, that fast onset, and the shorter duration is kind of where we've hung our hat in terms of chemistry and drug delivery. That's our focus in terms of differentiation. I think when it comes to the overall industry, it's also important. So we expect the first treatments to come to market to be quite long acting, and we expect those to create some hurdles, meaning that they're most likely to be reserved for the most severe patients. Then also, we know we've got a big journey ahead of us in terms of educating the general public around these molecules. There's still, I imagine, a lot of apprehension from some people about being out of control for many hours at a time, or having some psychedelic experience. We've got to educate therapists, got to educate psychiatrists. So there's a long way to go when we come to market in terms of forming that market. But we think the easiest way to get broad adoption is to make these treatments more accessible. And of course, at the end of the day, they have to be reimbursable. Plenty of people have the opportunity to access these treatments if they are shorter acting, and you can get them at a local clinic just not far from their home.
Wonderful. And I think I have time for one more question here. Well, actually, I'll jump to the chat very quickly. I don't know if this is something you can answer or not, so feel free to ignore. But Solar Up, any communication and or guidance from the FDA for test phases? Anything that you can tell our friend Solar Up here?
Yeah, I think we're learning constantly from FDA, and FDA, I think, right now is quite inundated with questions around psychedelics. And even in the last 12 months, they are gradually shifting their attitude towards the clinical studies around these molecules. It's not straightforward. Okay, so because these treatments involve the incorporation of psychotherapy with the drug, it does make the clinical studies a little bit more complex. We've taken significant advice from ex-FDA staffers, 25-year veterans from FDA, and we've designed our clinical studies using full GCP and ICH guidelines, and plan to optimize our pivotal studies to be useful in both Europe with EMA, and also in the US with FDA.
Perfect. So time for just one more. The partnership with Kernel is really interesting. And I think what we're seeing now, and what we've heard from some companies today on this track, is that tracking how the brain responds to these therapies is of the utmost importance. Actually understanding what the data tells us from these therapies, right? So how will that data, once we have it, shift the paradigm of how we judge not only the efficacy of these treatments, but removing the stigma altogether, right? In terms of how useful they are.
Yeah, in a way, it's like, a picture tells 1,000 words. So we're somehow more convinced when we see some pretty pictures of brain activity than we are just by observing qualitative results in patients. But what the Kernel team has managed to do that's really breakthrough is they haven't created a new neuroimaging technology. What they've done is focused on miniaturizing it and making it more portable. So there are studies with patients on psychedelic drugs using fMRI. But an fMRI machine is a long tube with 120 decibels clanging around someone's head, and it costs millions of dollars and is a room size. So it's not exactly accessible for a broad number of patients. What we can do with the Kernel technology is get a lot more access. And that more access means a greater data set. So now we're able then potentially to track patients' neural activity before, during, and after a treatment and see what's happening in the brain and see if that neuroplasticity that seems to occur can also be identified using the kernel technology, which will help us design potentially better molecules as we go forward into the future.
Perfect. I could not have said it better. Thank you so much, Doug, for that. You guys, we're moving to a panel now, and Doug, you're sticking around for this. But before, or really as we bring the rest of the folks on, this is Doug Drysdale again, the CEO of Cybin, and the ticker again is CLXPF on the OTC and CYBN on the NEO. And there you go. There's your website, cybin.com. Thank you, Doug.